Hey, what's up guys, it's DarkArmedDuelist, and today I'm going to be doing a fossil test hand video. So you guys have been requesting me to do fossils for a little while to actually understand how this crazy build that I actually built worked. And it's really fun to play around with it. It is more of a going second build, but I will show you going first builds, because this deck really wants to OTK with Skull King, but this deck kind of can play either going first or going second with cards like Torrential Tribute and my awesome tech cards you guys will see in just a minute. So without further ado guys, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, hit that bell there so you can become part of the notification squad, and definitely check out that Patreon down in the description below, because we have some awesome rewards for you guys, like getting a name description for every single video, getting a signed card sent to the mail, or even getting to us a deck profile just like this one with a test hand every single month that you are a patron. So without further ado, let's get straight on into this, guys. So I got a hold of this deck. I got a hold of fossils. I actually bought like 3 sets of the fossil deck because I wanted to be able to play around with it and actually throw it into other decks, because it's more of an engine, kind of like how Invoked and Shadowls are, where they don't really function as well in pure builds, where they function better in engines. But I wanted to show you guys what this deck can do pure with some of my awesome tech cards that I put in the deck. It's basically a rock deck, and I will go ahead and tell you guys, I am not playing a single Adamancipator card in this entire deck. There's not a single Adamancipator in this build, and this build is very budget if you guys are looking for a budget build of fossils. So this is the deck for you. I've seen some people play it, and it's, to be honest with you, some other people's builds are a little bit bricky. This one's not quite as bricky, but being a pure build, they can be a little bricky. But this deck has answers for everything, which is what's really nice about it. So you might see a test hand that I pull, and you'll go, oh, I can't do anything with that going first. Well, yes, you can still do stuff, but it's not as optimal. You really want to go second once your opponent's established a field, or if you go first, there's a couple of cards in the deck to go first. This is kind of one of those eclectic decks that can go first or second. It doesn't really matter. If you lose the die roll, it doesn't super end your entire career. So let's go ahead and do a quick draw test hand and see what we can actually get out of the deck. So we're going to go ahead and draw into an Ash Blossom. That's always good to get an Ash Blossom. Miracle Rupture, we already had the Foolish Burial, so we can search out our copy of Fossil Fusion. Withering Soldier, that's really good because you can normal summon it. Torrential Tribute, and a copy of Morphing Jar number 2. Now this is one of my tech cards that I was actually talking about just a minute ago. So if I was going first with this particular hand, it's not going to look crazy impressive, but there is a really cool interaction that you have with this hand. So what we're going to do is we're going to immediately activate the Miracle Rupture, and the Miracle Rupture is going to send from our deck to the graveyard the Withering Soldier. Once you send Withering Soldier from deck to graveyard, it lets you add from your deck to hand any card that specifically lists Fossil Fusion from your deck to your hand, or a Fossil Fusion. Then you shuffle that deck up. So after you do that, we're going to add the Fossil Fusion from deck to hand, and we're going to send that Miracle Rupture to the graveyard. Now you have a really cool play. Yes, it is set to pass, but you set the Morphing Jar, and you set the copy of Torrential Tribute. So you basically have 2 board wipes on your side of the field set up to OTK your opponent with the Fossil Fusion next turn. Now if it goes into our opponent's next turn, and they do attack into this, you can kind of read the situation. If they start putting any monster negates on board, yes, go ahead and blow it, the Torrential Tribute, and go ahead and blow their whole board. Or you can flip the copy of Morphing Jar, and once you flip the Morphing Jar, you can just immediately shuffle back all their monsters, and then they draw cards, which is going to fill up their graveyard with monsters that are level 5 and higher, because they can't special summon anything that's level 4 or higher. Like, they can special summon 4, 3, 2, and 1 off the Morphing Jar, but if they have, say, 4 monsters on the field, like this, they have 4 monsters that are attacking into you, which that's 3. But if they had 4, they would shuffle all 4 back into the deck, and then they would draw cards equal to the number of, or draw until they hit 4 monsters. And if they hit a monster that's level 5 or higher, then it goes to the graveyard, and it counts as one of those monsters that they drew. Or they drew something that can't be special summoned, like a copy of Blackluster Soldier. It goes to the graveyard, which then we can capitalize on because we have Fossil Fusion set up. And we do have the Fossil Fusion set up in the graveyard, because you can banish your Withering Warrior, and once your Morphing Jar goes to the graveyard, you'll have basically 2 materials in your graveyard to start going off. So you kind of got to think with this deck, don't look at the first field and think, oh, that's not that great, I don't have that many negates. Look at how many board wipes you have. The board wipes are what's really setting you up, because you have a negate in hand, you have the shuffle back, and you have the board wipe here. So you have a really interesting setup that you can pull off with this particular hand. I mean, that's a simple setup with the way that I built this deck. It's very simple. Anybody can just about pick this deck up and play with it. It is a beginner guide to fossils. You can upgrade the deck by playing Invoked Fossils. You can play Shaddoll Fossils. You can play Dino Fossils. Fossils can be thrown in just about anything as long as you can tech in Miracle Rupture. I think it's like 11 cards that I play in here, because I play 3 Withering Soldiers, 3 Fossil Fusion, 2 Time Stream, and 3 Miracle Rupture. As long as you can fit 11 cards in your deck, you can fit a Fossil Engine in any deck, essentially. You can even get it down to 10 if you just want to play the 2 copies of the Withering Soldier. So, let's go ahead and draw into our next test hand. So our next test hand, we're going to draw into an Ash Blossom again, Prime Material Congrate, Kaiju Gameciel, we got a Mathematician, and we have a Raiden. This is pretty good too because we have essentially plays that we can go off with, because you can normal summon out that copy of Mathematician going first, and then immediately, again, send from deck to graveyard your Withering Soldier, which is going to search from deck to hand our copy of Fossil Fusion. Now, you don't want to add the Fossil Fusion at this particular moment. You could get the Miracle Rupture and send something else to graveyard, or get Time Stream. It depends on what you have in hand. Like if I would have already had Fossil Fusion in my hand, I probably would have added Miracle Rupture to give me another monster in the graveyard just to thin the deck a little bit more. Now that I've got the Mathematician on field, if my opponent attacks into it, then they're going to let me draw a card, which the card would be a copy of Call by the Grave, and then if I draw for our next turn, it'd be another Fossil Fusion. So basically I'd have another Fusion summon rocking around. If they also send a card from their deck to or from their hand to the graveyard, you can actually trigger the Prime Material Congrate and then immediately set it to your side of the field, and then you have a level 8 monster that you can use to be able to attack them, and also a 3k beat stick, which is pretty nice. And when it's split face up, it destroys 2 cards. This card has a really neat interaction with Morphing Jar number 2, because if they send a monster from deck to graveyard, which when they excavate off the top of the deck, that counts as sending from deck to grave, you get to special summon this in face down defense, which is pretty cool. So that's it for the second test hand. Let's go ahead and jump straight into the third one. Again, you're not going for, with this deck, this is an OTK build. You're not trying to get a bunch of like crazy stuff on the field going first. You're trying to get like a board established so on turn 3 you can just like push for game and just give it to them in the next, next round. So let's go ahead and draw again. And with all those kaijus, you're going to be able to do it anyways. This deck reminds me a little bit of Crusadia's, where it doesn't put a lot of negates on board, but it also can have the Nibirus and the Gameciels and the kaijus and the Morphing Jars to board wipe to get stuff out of the way so I can summon my big monsters and attack directly and win. So we're going to get drawn to an Ash Blossom. We draw into this card every single time. So the Ash Blossom loves us. Torrential Tribute, that's pretty good. Fossil Fusion, that's pretty good. Morphing Jar number 2, and a copy of Torrential Tribute. So you're essentially guaranteed a board wipe, if not 2, because you can, again, do something simple. Set the Morphing Jar, set this, set the copy of Torrential. And then also, a lot of your spells and traps do benefit off of getting sent to the graveyard. So if your opponent doesn't attack into you, and they set something to you, can flip the Morphing Jar, and it'll shuffle itself back into the deck. And once it does, we get to draw cards until we draw a monster, which is pretty cool. It'd be a lot easier to show you guys that during a live duel, which I'll try and do in the future, just to show you that really cool interaction. But if we do draw, we're going to add a Withering Soldier, and it gets special summoned to our side of the field. I believe it gets special summoned in face down defense. So that's not that big of a deal, because it can search us a copy of a Miracle, or you can search us a Miracle Rupture or whatever we need. So if they do destroy this, then you can just grab from deck to hand your Miracle Rupture. And then once we actually go into our turn again, they're probably going to have something in the graveyard, because they usually, usually when people play, they send a lot of cards like an Ash Blossom or something like that from deck to graveyard, and that's fine. Or we have the Torrential Tribute to stack our opponent's graveyard as well. So you have plays with both of these to board wipe your opponent, and you have the ability to Ash Blossom them as well, which would actually get us a Miracle or a Fossil Fusion play if we wanted to go that route. Or you could go Miracle Rupture and send, during your turn, any card that you wanted from your deck to the graveyard. Or, if you wanted to play it this way, this is the way I would play it. I would activate the Fossil Fusion, banish these 2 from my graveyard, and then special summon to my side of the field the copy of Skullbone if my opponent didn't have anything in their graveyard. This would go to the graveyard, activate the copy of Miracle Rupture. Miracle Rupture will then send from our deck to the graveyard a Withering Soldier, which is going to get us a search of Time Stream. And then once we get the search of Time Stream, you can shuffle that deck right up, and then you're going to get a draw as well, which is really, really helpful to be able to get that additional draw. So we're going to go ahead and draw, and we draw an Interrupted Kaiju Slumber. So if our opponent does try and, board wipe us or do anything crazy, we have 3 board wipes against our opponent, which is really, really, really cool. And you can actually upgrade the Skullbone, because you can do something like this and activate the copy of Time Stream, send this to the graveyard, upgrade it into Skull Knight, and then once you upgrade to Skull Knight, your Skullbone in graveyard has the ability that you can banish this card from your graveyard to add a time stream from your deck to your hand. So you can banish the copy of Skullbone and add your copy of Time Stream to your hand. And then this will be in the graveyard over here. Activate the copy of Time Stream, banish this, and then go directly into your copy of Skull King or Skull Geos. If you want to upgrade either or, as long as they're 2 stars higher than the monster that's sent, you can upgrade into it. So you could go into Skull Geos or you could go into Skull King, depending on which one you feel like you can OTK your opponent with. That would be really, really cool. Also, with this particular board setup, you have a pop in the graveyard. This can attack twice, and you have the 2 Torrential Tributes and the Kaiju Slumber to really go off against your opponent. So you have a lot of different card advantages and combos that you can go off in this deck to be able to OTK your opponent, because you're really waiting on them to make a move. And that's why doing the test hands is really cool with this deck, because you can, if you can look and see how you can break your opponent's board, that's really the way that you got to look at this deck. You can't look at this deck of, oh, I'm going to put 18 negates on board. That's not how it works. You want to put cards in your hand that's going to deal with your opponent's negates, like your Nibiru's, your Kaiju's, your copies of Torrential Tribute, your copies of Morphing Jar, Torrential Tribute right there. And then finally, after you've board wiped them with a bunch of different ways, you have the Fossil Fusion to make advantage off the cards that were sent to the graveyard, which is really what this deck functions and the way that it works, which is really cool. It basically is kind of like one man's junk is another man's treasure kind of thing, that you can use their stuff against them, which is kind of what's cool about this. It functions very, very, very similar to the way that Invoked functions, where they banish a card out of your opponent's graveyard. But something really cool that you will notice is that these fusion monsters are all different. The copies of Skullgar and Geos require monsters from your opponent's graveyard, while all 3 of these require monsters in your graveyard that are banished by the effect of Fossil Fusion. So you can only special summon these if your opponent has a monster that they're banishing out of the graveyard that's level 4 or lower, and this one can be a level 7 or higher, while all of these are just 4 or lower, 5 or 6, or 7 or higher. It just depends on which one you feel like you can go for. And that's why this deck functions better going second, is because you have those abilities to be able to go into cards that are really strong against your opponent. I usually like going into Skullgar, but let's just say I usually end up going for Skullbone. So let's go ahead and shuffle it up. We're going to say we're going second this time. Let's just say our opponent has 2 monsters on the field, no back row. Okay, 2 monsters on the field, no back row, no hand. Just 2. We're going to go ahead and lay down something simple like a Deco Talker against us. And we're just going to say that they have that. Something simple just to show you guys how the deck would function in a situation where they have not that great of a board. Let's go ahead and draw, and we'll talk about if they did have a really good board. Because if we draw into Nibiru, we automatically have a way to deal with their board. So with something like this, you have plenty of ways to handle your opponent. And that's what's really cool about this deck, is if they have the Deco Talker on their side of the field, or even if they have a high-level monster, you have a way to go into it. The only downside of this deck, the reason I wanted to show you guys Deco Talker, is the only downside of this deck is facing a strictly link-based deck. Is if you're facing a strictly link-based deck, you're going to have a little bit of issue with link monsters because they don't have levels, and XYZ monsters don't have ranks. So XYZs in link decks, they do require materials, which is great, but if they link climb and they end up banishing their materials, you've got nothing to fusion summon away with. But let's go ahead and say that they have a Deco Talker. We're going to go ahead and normal summon out our Mathematician, which I would always summon it to a zone the link the monster points to, but I'm going to fusion summon here so it gains 500, which is pretty cool, or this gains 500. We're going to go ahead and use the copy of Mathematician to send from the deck to the graveyard Withering Soldier. Withering Soldier is then going to search from deck a copy of Fossil Fusion, which I believe we already had one, so no, you can grab Miracle Rupture if you want to grab Miracle Rupture, because that's probably going to come in a little bit more handy. Grab the copy of Miracle Rupture from the graveyard, or from the deck, excuse me, and then once you grab that, you can just activate that from your hand if you want to activate that, or you can wait and fusion summon after you attack. So you could do something like simple like attack into this, it'll go to the graveyard, you'll get to draw a card, which is another Withering Soldier, which is pretty good. And then you can set something like your Torrential Tribute, because then you got the draw off of this, and you have a board wipe so you don't lose your monster, which is pretty cool. You also have the Fossil Fusion, depending on what they have in their graveyard, that you can fusion summon off, which is really neat. Because if they used a level 8 monster to go into the Deco Talker, like Degrade Buster, if you're playing against a strictly high level or strictly high-level deck like Malefics or something like that, this card becomes insane. This card breaks their entire field, which is really cool. Especially if you drop something like Interrupted Kaiju Slumber and then use Fossil Fusion and UOTK them. I mean, it's over with. It's really, really cool. And the cool thing is a lot of times with this deck is it really punishes your opponent for playing. Like, if they don't play, this deck doesn't do all that much. But if they play and they start popping off and putting stuff in their graveyard, it really, really, really starts to look bad against them. So let's go ahead and do a going second test hand again. We're going to go ahead and draw into a Morphing Jar number 2, Prime Material Congrate, Withering Soldier, Interrupted Kaiju Slumber, and a copy of one of our Kaijus. So let's go ahead and say we're going second. We're going to go ahead and draw for turn. We got a time stream. That's pretty good. So go ahead and just activate Kaiju Slumber. I mean, you have a board wipe. Use it. Go ahead and send it from deck to graveyard. And then after you send it from deck to graveyard, you can give your opponent that Gamma Seal. And then once you give them the Gamma Seal, you can grab Dolgaran. Dolgaran's a level 8, so if you can get rid of it or link it away, you have plays to go off, which is what's really, really, really cool about this deck. So at this point, you have normal summons that you can go off into. You can normal summon out your Withering Soldier. Withering Soldier is a really good normal summon that you can just deal with your opponent's stuff. And you can go into something like a copy of Nightmare Phoenix and just immediately link it away. Or you can go into a copy of Cross Sheep, which is what I would probably go in for. Go ahead and link these into Cross Sheep, and then use the effect of your Withering Soldier because it was sent to the graveyard, and search a copy of Fossil Fusion. Once you get that Fossil Fusion, you can do something really cool where you immediately just drop the Fossil Fusion on your side of the field and special summon out a copy of a monster from your deck, or from your extra deck, which is going to be your Skull King. Once you got the Skull King on your side of the field, if you wanted to make Phoenix here, you could make Phoenix here instead because we banished our only material. So instead of making Cross Sheep, if you don't have any monsters in the graveyard, don't make Cross Sheep, make Phoenix because it's bigger. And then if you wanted to, you could give yourself another Kaiju just because you don't have a monster on your side of the field. You can Kaiju yourself. Haha, Kaiju myself. And then you have Time Stream if you need it for later. Then you can attack your opponent. You have cards to discard to deal with spells and traps. You could discard your Congrate, or you could discard your copy of Morphing Jar number 2, because you're really not going to need it with this board. But this is a backup plan as well, that if your opponent does board wipe you, you can set this, and then immediately, if all this goes away, not when this is on the field, but if they blow board, if you can't OTK them, you have the Morphing Jar number 2 to set and wait until you can pop off again, which is pretty cool. You can just attack into the copy of Gamma Seal, and then you're going to do 600, and then you attack with your copy of Skull Warrior once and then twice. So you're going to do 600 with this, and then you're going to do 6,200 with the attack of this, and then the copy of Phoenix goes in for the OTK. And there's not a lot that they could have done to stop you, because all you did was Kaiju them. So you would have got rid of their one monster negate on board. And you have simple fields that are like this that all started with a Interrupted Kaiju Slumber and a Link monster. That was it. That's all I used was a Kaiju Slumber and a normal summon. That's it. That's all it took to get this field, which is really cool about this deck, is that it does make, it's nothing that you can't pick up if you know how to play Invoked. If you know how to play Invoked, you can play this deck extremely easy, and that's why I think this deck is going to be a really, really fun contender. Let's go ahead and draw one more and just see what we can get, and I'll show you guys maybe one more test hand, just to show you guys a little bit more action of what this deck does. So we're going to go ahead and draw, and we're going to draw Nibiru, a Kaiju Slumber, another Nibiru, Ash Blossom, and a Morphing. This is a great hand. Okay, you guys might be looking at this hand and going, oh, that's bad. It's not. This hand is probably one of the better test hands that we've drawn, because you have double Nibiru. If I'm going second, I'm drawing into a Miracle Rupture, and now I'm really set, because you can do something really crazy like this. Your opponent's usually going to special summon multiple times. You got the Ash Blossom. Discard it. Activate the Nibiru. Special summon it to your field. Give your opponent the token. Doesn't matter how big it is. I'm going to beat through it. It's fine. I'm gonna hit it with a copy of Slumber. Drop Slumber on your turn. Slumber pops off. Sends this to graveyard. You get summon Kaijus on either player's field. I get a Dolgaran. You get a copy of Gamma Seal. That's just how the cookie crumbles. I get the bigger one. Then we're going to activate the copy of Miracle Rupture. Miracle Rupture is going to pop off, and we're going to send from deck to graveyard a Withering Soldier. It's all about getting that Withering Soldier to graveyard so you can get your copy of Fossil Fusion. Grab that Fossil Fusion from deck and immediately drop the Fossil Fusion. once you drop the Fossil Fusion, you have in your graveyard both of these monsters that can really help you a lot. Or you can wait and not do that, and you can do this. Instead of activating that, you can normal summon out the Morphing Jar. I know that looks a little strange, but you can normal summon it, link it away, and then summon Cross Sheep. Once you summon the Cross Sheep, now you can activate the copy of Fossil Fusion and banish a rock monster, which would be your copy of Nibiru, and a copy of a Dolgaran, which would fusion summon into Skull King, which ironically enough looks like it would be the fusion materials to summon our copy of Skull King. And now that you have this board, your copy of Cross Sheep will react, and Cross Sheep special summons a fusion monster from your graveyard. That's a level 4 lower monster if you fusion summon, which is really cool because then you can special summon out your copy of Withering Soldier back to your side of the field. Once you get the Withering Soldier back on the field in defense mode, you have link materials. If you want to link, I can go like this. I can link these two away, and I can summon out my copy of Nightmare Unicorn. Nightmare Unicorn will trigger, discard, bounce this back to my hand, give that back. And now, 28, 28, 22, I win. That's it. I just won. And I gave you, I Nibiru'd you, and I gave you a Kaiju. I board wiped you twice. And there was nothing you could do about it, essentially. Because I Nibiru'd you, there's not a lot of responses to Nibiru right now that people are actually maining. And Gamma Seal is just like, GG, here's a Gamma Seal. I'm going to take it back, though. Ha, joke's on you, it's actually mine. So that's it for the testing, guys. That's basically how this deck works. And as you can see, it really does work. It's really fun. And I highly recommend that if you're going to play this deck, play it this way. If you're going to try and build a pure version of this deck, this is probably one of the more optimal builds. I've seen a lot of builds out there where people are playing like 3 Congrates. I think I'm playing 2 Congrates. And if you guys want to see the deck, it is in the description below where you guys can check out the deck profile of this. But anyways, guys, this is DarkArmedDuelist. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, hit the bell on there so you can come by our notification squad, and definitely tell me what you think of this deck down in the comments down below. And I'll see you guys in the next video. See you later, guys.